Okay, well, we are live. It is a little bit after 6:30. Thank you for joining us for Friends, Food, and Faith. I was kind of debating on this one because I wasn't really coming up with a good topic. I thought I could talk about maybe the tenets of faith, but then I was like, well, maybe we can just talk about just having to bother the Father again. I mean, it's not like this has to be like a every time like this. So I'll leave it to those present who what they would want to do. Do you guys want to talk about the tenets of the faith? Or do you want to talk about just general topics that you may have? Does anyone have any pressing questions?
Right. I don't have anything pressing like most weeks. And last month I had to wait a week because of the friends food.
Yeah. So, I mean, we can talk about the tenets of faith. So, when I say that, do we have understanding of what that means?
No.
Great. Anyone else? All right, wonderful. So, okay, we look at things that are what we kind of define things by how binding they may be, right? So, in other words, the question is at the heart of this is what do we as Catholics have to believe and uphold to actually call ourselves not just Catholic but Christian, right? So these are kind of binding tenets, and the funny thing about it is they may not be recognized by all the different denominations, and that's rather unfortunate. But from time immemorial, this has always been the case. So there's, in general, 6 things that would have to be upheld to actually call yourself Catholic, and these are like the minimum, right? These are like the bar is so low that if you fall below this, you really can't call yourself Catholic. So the first one is actually rather generic, and that just means following the moral law, right? So in other words, follow the 10 commandments. Now, none of us do that perfectly, right? Because we sin. We all do that. So whenever we sin, we automatically violate that tenet, right? Now, why do we have that as a tenet? Well, it's pretty evident, right? That's what God demands, right? That's what was given to Moses on Mount Sinai. Those are the Beatitudes that Jesus promotes, which kind of elevates those. Instead of these external actions, the Beatitudes are more internal. They're really about our dispositions, our thoughts, our feelings, and not necessarily the feel or think things, but like what we do with those, right? Do we dwell on those? Do we allow those to fester when it comes to evil thoughts or feelings? Or do we actually act out upon them, or just, or do we try to dismiss them right away, right? When it comes to the conscience, there's a kind of a gray line in that area, right? So when we talk about what's matter for the confessional, well, in general, having a bad thought or having a bad feeling is not sinful. You can't necessarily help that. If I'm driving down the street, as one of the predecessors here from St. Anne, who's a former associate, would say, you're driving down the street and you see a picture of a risque model on the billboard, gentlemen. Well, look away, but you can't necessarily help the fact that that billboard's there. You can't do anything about that. So, in other words, if you inadvertently look at it and you have a thought or a feeling, that itself is not necessarily sinful. Now, the next time you drive down the street and you know that that sign is there, well, maybe you should do some things to avoid your vision, right? So, avoiding the near occasion of sin is what we're called to do from a moral standpoint, right? So, again, though, we don't do that perfectly, right? And so we want to be conscious of those things. But again, having a thought or feeling associated with an image or something we experience is in itself not sinful. The sinfulness then comes what we do after that, right? Or how do we avoid that in the future? Or what do we do to kind of overcome it, right? So I want to be clear about that. So that's the first tenet, and that's pretty evident of why that's a tenet. Does anyone know any other tenets of the faith? The 5 others, maybe. So again, that's coming from God, right? Those are divine law. That's something that we can violate. So I mean, that means even think of keeping holy the Sabbath day. Well, okay, how is that done? And when we look back in history, when it comes to the laws of Israel, there were 613 laws that were kind of thereabouts, defining how that would be done, right? And so a lot of the laws that were handed down from Moses, in whether it be Leviticus, whether it be in Deuteronomy, we would say, yeah, these are of God for sure, but there are limitations on that. So in other words, how do I maintain the Sabbath? How do I keep that holy? Well, you go to synagogue, you go to the temple and offer sacrifice. That's how you do it. And that's what a lot of the ceremonial laws were directed towards, because they had the tabernacle, they had the dwelling place. That's where those things happened, right? And those were actually valid all the way through the time of the destruction of the last temple. So you're talking about, in general, 2,000 years, right? Between the time that the law was handed to Moses to the time of the destruction of the temple, it's about 2,000 years in general. That's a long time, right? So after the destruction of the temple, though, so ceremonials will change. Well, how can I offer sacrifice if there's no place to offer sacrifice to? Right? Now, there is some interesting questions about what if the temple's reestablished, right? Or maybe what's more binding for Christians? Are Christians then required to follow the old law if and when the temple is reestablished?
Define temple.
Well, the temple is where the tabernacle is.
Okay.
Right? The temple is the place of sacrifice.
Okay.
So if you're taking it strictly by that, you would say, well, no, because our temple, our place of sacrifice is every church that's around the world, right? Catholic Orthodox, there's a sacrifice. So therefore, there's no need. Right. So there would be no need to. But then there's an interesting question about, well, wait a minute, isn't God's law binding? God gave that law to Moses of how to worship, of how to sacrifice, what to sacrifice, for what reasons. Well, fortunately, we don't have to come to that conclusion yet because, well, there's no temple, right? So, and we may trust that there may not be a new temple. As a matter of fact, one of the signs of the apocalypse from not necessarily Christian ethic, but Jewish tradition is that the temple will be reestablished. Okay, that could be the sign of the coming of the Messiah. In our case, that would be the second coming of Jesus, right? So is that possible? Sure. What would happen as Christians if that were to happen? That's a good question, right?
Well, Jesus came to clear up everything Moses did, so you'd think he'd clear it up.
Well, the question is, what do you understand what we mean by that? Because it's true that a lot of the laws that were given by Moses, and even that were even extended upon by the leaders of the people, are what they called midrash, right? So if we're going back to the Sabbath, right? Okay, part of the Sabbath is keeping holy is also having leisure on that day. Well, how do we do that? Go out and play basketball a day, go out and play golf. Well, no, the idea there is you rest, right? Now, rest is kind of a very broad term, but back in the day, they would make certain strictures to make sure you were making your rest. For instance, the midrash would be you can't travel more than a half a mile away from your home on the Sabbath. Why half a mile? Who knows? That's probably because that's the distance there was between water, right? In case of emergency. There were like emergency situations or exemptions. We'll say half a mile. It takes about half a mile to get some help if you need it. Fine. But those are extreme approaches to ensure the divine law was followed. So in other words, were they actually binding? They weren't necessarily coming from God. They were reasonable, some would say reasonable, extensions of law to ensure that law was followed. So think about it this way. Let's say in order to ensure safety on the streets, there would be a stoplight or a crosswalk and another stoplight 200 feet down. Okay, well, that one stoplight is really to ensure that you are safe to get to the next stoplight. It's not really necessary. It's really there as sort of an extension of that one purpose to keep some people getting run down to the crosswalk. Right. Okay, you could say that's a little extreme, right? Is that because you're kind of being redundant. You're trying to be an extreme application of that law to ensure the law is followed. And yeah, I think you could say reasonably that would be, right? And that's what a lot of these laws of Moses, so to speak, were. They were extensions that were applied to ensure the divine law was followed, right? So, but following the divine law is what we're required to do as Christians. So, put God before all things. Watch your language. Keep holy the Sabbath day. Give honor to proper authority. Do not kill or diminish anyone in any way. Have good custody of your sexual desires, right? Or sexual gifts. Ensure that you are not taking anything that does not belong to you. Be truthful to one another, right? Be honest. Don't covet things, right? Don't have a disordered desire towards things of this world directed towards the world to come. In general, that's what we're called to do. That's like the bare minimum, right? And there are different gradations of that, right? And extensions of that are reasonable through the divine law, right? So in other words, there's a big debate about, even today, between maybe Protestant sects and especially Catholicism, is the role of pornography. Some denominations say, well, pornography is fine, right? Especially if, here's the moral argument they make, especially if it deters you from doing some disordered action, right? So in other words, if there's a form of pornography that one can engage in, whatever that means, that will stop you from doing some other deeper sin, then that way it will be morally justified. Now we would say,
So if I shoot one person instead of shooting two, I'm better.
well, I mean, so it's not the same. It's not maybe the same realm.
But it just seems like
It's not a
just
perfect
seems like
analogy. You're right. So
I-
yeah, we as Catholics say there's still a diminishment of the
there's a
dignity of the human person.
degradation of something.
There's a degradation of humanity in that
Absolutely.
regardless.
There's no if
And
ands,
by
or buts.
engaging with that, you're still reducing somebody either way, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, is it better to maybe engage with artificial intelligence pornography when it comes to basically child? And this is a very extreme example. Artificial intelligence pornography that's child oriented. They'll keep you from actually engaging in the action with the child. Well, you can say something about the disordered nature of that person's consciousness, of that will. That's one thing. We would say, let's start there maybe. And the whole thing about artificial intelligence is still kind of an interesting topic because, well, you could say, well, pornography, there's always going to be a victim regardless, right? Even if that victim's yourself. And in the same way, it would say for artificial intelligence, that's kind of what you're doing.
Mhm.
You may introduce an actual person to an object because whether that person exists or not,
Somebody had to introduce the
Well,
intelligence to
but
it.
regardless, I'm still reducing myself,
Yourself to that.
right, in that regard. Okay. So we would say, regardless of what it is or who the victim is, there's always going to be a victim, even if that victim is yourself, in which case it would be illicit, right? It would be illicit to engage regardless. Now, that's kind of the arguments that are out there. But the moral law still presides. It still says, hey, you're called to take guard of your sexual desires and direct them towards your proper end, which is always a good, right?
Mhm.
Whether that be in a state of celibacy, whether that be in a state of married life, whether it be in a single state, you're called to do that, right? Either way. In other words, chastity is always to be maintained. We're all called to that, no matter what. That's what the Sixth Commandments direct towards, which is a good. It's saying no to a no, right? A no to a degenerate or degeneration of the human person. Good. So there's other certain things that maybe flow from that the church would uphold that wouldn't necessarily be design law. Now some people would say, well, isn't that sort of Pharisaic? Isn't that kind of going back to what the Old Testament or the religious people were doing, extending the law to something else? Well, yeah, you could make that argument, but I think the thing when you look at these things, there's always a theological and there's also a practical aspect of these things. Look at the divine law. There's a theological aspect of that. It's good for me to give myself over to God completely because I know that that's actually going to be something that's going to heaven. And that's something to be fully enjoyed in heaven. But practically speaking, it also allows me to live a good life here on earth, right? When I actually have control of my faculties in a way that's good, holy, and healthy, I'm happier on this earth. And I bring that happiness to other people. Good. If that's the least you can say about it, good, right? To be fully human is to be fully engaged with God. And to be fully engaged with God is to be fully engaged with the guidelines and the greatness that he gives us in these laws. These are not acts of, bondage or acts of freedom. So it's always important to remember that. So in the same way, the church kind of takes us and says, well, there's other things that we can do and uphold that are directed towards the people and yourself in general that kind of flow from the divine law. So the first one of those would be, and this is something that is overlooked, and I have to admit, I think my generation, and I know I did, I looked over this all the time. This is one of the tenets I don't think I upheld very well over the course of my life, and still struggle with today and try to do the best I can today. But providing for the needs of the church. Now, when we talk about providing for the needs of the church, typically we reduce that to time, talent, and treasure, right? So how do I serve the church in her needs with who I am and the position I find myself in discernment of how I can do that, right? So whether that is as a minister in the mass, whether that is as a catechist, whether that's as a teacher in the school, whether that is just a parent who maybe brings the desserts on the different holidays parties or whatever it may be, right? There's ways that I can give myself in that regard, right? Because the case, we do need money, right? Money, even though we're not directed towards that as an end, right? They are a means to help provide for not just the church, but the people the church serves. Whether it be people in the pews, whether it be people through Vincent de Paul, whether it be people in the charitable arm of the organization, that's necessary. And who to get it from? Well, it's best to get it from the people that are actually part of the church because it allows them an opportunity for charity. That's the whole point. It's not the church is so greedy and wants money all the time. None of that's going to my pocket. None of the money that comes in on Sunday is really going into my pocket. It's going straight into the electricity. It's going through the plumbing. It's going to parts of the school, the different ministries of the parish. It's going to run the parish and do the mission of the church. It's important to understand that. Now, there are decisions made by pastors in association with certain organizations and councils that need to happen. And they need funds in order to do that. But I think our generation and those maybe it's getting better now. I don't know, but I think that was lost a lot. The idea was that the church has so much money they don't need anymore. Well, and in some ways that's somewhat of a bar for a lot of people to enter into the church. So I have a brother-in-law, for instance, who and again I've never actually talked to him directly about this because it's hard in some ways, but he married my sister. They got married in the church. They're raising their children Catholic. So, I mean, good. I'm not going to complain about that. I do worry about him because he's a good man and he never really engaged with any religion at all. I'm not sure if he believes in God or not. I think he does, but I mean, okay. But one of his big arguments to my sister was that, well, the church is so rich. And to be fair, he looks at things like the cathedral and these other churches where they have these statuaries and these gold and these little things. And it's like, well, how is that actually serving the mission of the church, right? Now, again, I haven't had this conversation with him, but if I were to have that conversation, what I would say was, well, there are certain things that could be dedicated to God, which are good. And there are physical things. God is not just spirit. God became man. He took on a human body. He gave us tangible things to be used in his service. And so it seems good to take the best of things and offer them back to him. Now, what's interesting is there's scriptural reference for this. If we go all the way back to Genesis chapter 4, we recall the sacrifice of Cain and Abel. Now, there are many different understandings of this particular passage. Cain and Abel were sons of Adam and Eve. This is after the fall. And they were called by God to offer sacrifice to him. And Cain, as we're told, took the cream of the crop. He was a rancher. He was a person that was into animal husbandry. He took the best of his flock and offered that to God. And because he did that, he offered the best that was there. God accepted his sacrifice. Cain, on the other hand, took the dregs, the leftovers. Well, I'll pick up a few kernels here of corn, maybe some wheat kernel, throw it in there. Okay, fine, here you go, right? And we're told that God did not accept that sacrifice because he was a farmer, not because he was a farmer and Abel was a rancher. It was because Abel gave the best while Cain gave what was ever left over, right? And not recognizing the great gifts that God gave him. Now, of course, the story goes, Cain slew Abel out of jealousy. And God always asks that interesting question, hey, where's your brother? Which led to a deeper fall in some ways and kind of a solidification of the human nature after the fall of Adam and Eve. But that's maybe another story. So in other words, God wants us to give the best to him. And Jesus does the same thing. Actually, this weekend is a great gospel. And it's oftentimes confusing. And it's also hard because Jesus tells us through the Gospel of Luke, whoever does not hate his mother and father and children and spouse, and whoever does not pick up his cross and follow me is not worthy of me. Wow, that's a very, very, and it's true, that is a very, very profound word that's used by Luke, and it truly is translated from the Greek into hate. Now, there's two mindsets of hate, right? A complete opposition to something, or a preference over something. Now, we would understand that Jesus is talking about the preference rather than the actual hate, because God doesn't call us to hate anything except for sin.
Mhm.
But that is a very particular word that's used. And it's used for that particular reason, to kind of underscore, no, you have to be detached from everything, not make even relationships into your God. And one of the things I'm kind of looking at in my homily this weekend is like, who's on our pedestals? Who do we put on those pedestals? Or what do we put on those pedestals? Because we all do it. And what Jesus is telling us is that's not it.
Better be him.
Better be him. Or else, not only that, is it's not even fair to them that we put on the pedestals.
Right.
Because when they fail us, what happens? Right?
You don't want to meet your hero.
They fall on you. I mean, so in other words, there's a lot of reasons of the reason God puts these things in place, and this whole understanding of giving to the church is to do that, to put God first. So we want to be clear that is a tenet that actually has a moral obligation. We are called to morally give ourselves and our time, talent, treasure to the needs of the church. Now, that doesn't mean we hand over all our money to the church. Doesn't mean we actually go destitute in doing that. But we look at the widow's mite, right? She trusted in God and she was given what she needed. So we're called to do the same, right? That's what we're supposed to do the same. Questions about that? That's, I think, kind of a big one in our world.
So are you saying that comes under the 10 Commandments, or is that a separate by itself?
I'm saying that's a morally binding tenet.
Okay.
for Christians.
It's number 2.
Yeah. So in other words, if you were to violate that, let's say, so what I'm looking at here is what would you confess in the confessional if you weren't to actually maintain these things? Because I don't think a lot of people think about that. Let's say you send your kids to the school. Let's say you're even part of the community to some extent. Then you come to mass every Sunday, right? But you don't get on any organizations. You don't engage yourself with the ministries. You don't give financially to the church. You really, the only time you really think about this place is we're actually here at Mass. Well, is that actually upholding that tenet?
Absolutely not.
It's not.
I don't think any of us do in that retrospect. I think you're right. And if we did, we wouldn't have a problem with priests or pews being empty. I mean,
I don't know. I don't know. I mean, we might still have a problem with priests, but maybe not. Maybe not. But in time and talent, maybe not. Right? Yeah.
And I too am guilty of it all my life.
I think the point is you're not alone there, John. I mean, I know I failed that for at least the first 3 years of my life, if not more.
And not just the monetary part,
right?
The whole
the talent, talent for
giving
time.
of my talents, what God has given me,
right.
to give back to the church. I usually take out golfing.
Yeah. Well, no, but that's what I'm saying, though, right? I mean, and again, I think that's kind of part of this. It's like, okay, what do I really do for the church or for her ministry that actually would be good? Now, granted, there may be certain people that feel ill-prepared, right, or inadequate. Now, that's understandable. That doesn't mean you shouldn't still search and try, right? I think one of the things, you're right, though, wouldn't it be great if everyone in every parish engaged in some way in the parish in the way that they feel called? And maybe that's just like a prayer chain. Maybe that's actually just like staying, for those who are homebound, praying the rosary for the parish every day. How much would that help? I think it will help immensely.
Yeah.
And that's still upholding that tenet. But I think the point is not many people bring that up in the confessional because they don't even think about it. Because maybe the behind that is the church has so much you don't have to worry about it. Or, well, if the parish fails, well, the archdiocese take care of it. And the archdiocese fails, well, then the Rome has to take care of it, right? In other words, well, you're never going to have a problem because, they'll be taken care of. And if they fail, that's the work of the Holy Spirit.
On a micro managing point, I don't see how people can actually look at those adults. Because, when I was a child in my household, who cares if you leave the door open or the light on? I mean, what's the big deal?
Yeah.
It's a big deal.
Yeah.
But then when you become adult and you pay bills, you're like, oh my goodness, I got to buy napkins. I never thought about all of this. So anybody who looks at the church and say, oh, they got a ton of money, you look at your own house, right? I think of this church as down my house is holy. Look at all the roof, the nut, the tuck pointing,
Right.
and the lights, and the electricity, and the threshold stuffs, and the doors, and the hinges, and
you look around here. There's a lot of work needs to be done. Right.
So
and that
would be a cheap way of anybody going, oh, they got plenty of money.
And
They
to be
don't say
fair,
that here.
there's always
I wouldn't think so.
And to be
anybody
fair-
that's been involved in a business or even handling your own house.
And to be fair, there's usually always someone that steps up to either provide that service or provide those. And that's true. I think that's very true. But I mean, it's also like but does it happen enough? All right. God always going to provide. That's true. But he provides it through people.
Yeah.
And so I think from a standpoint of like the morality of it, people don't really think of this as a moral issue. It's just like, well, I'll just figure it out and do what I got to do. It's not talked about. And that's true.
So
That's
most
true.
people don't know.
That's true.
So if you don't talk about it as children,
Yeah.
Well, and that's
most of them
actually,
put
that's-
their education in
And Kathy, that was the next point we're going to make. We're talking about adults, but what's funny that this is binding for children. Like for those who are each stage of reason, that's a binding tenet,
That is true.
right? That's a binding tenet. Now, how you do that? Well, maybe that'd be different for a 7-year-old compared to a 7-year-old.
Mhm.
Maybe similar. Who knows? But in that regard, there's difference in the stage of life of how you do that. You're right. As an adult, you would be expecting more from that adult. A child can still pray, right? So we always want to be careful and mindful of those things. But I think the important thing is you have to look at that. This is a moral binding tenet. And if you don't behold it, not only is it a matter for the confessional, but you really can't call yourself Catholic.
So where are these tenets written at?
And the catechism, but they have also been established over time.
Because I'm not familiar with the terminology.
Oh, really?
using Tenet.
Okay,
Yes,
I'll put
are
some
they-
reference up later, maybe in the description after we're done
Yeah,
recording.
just
But the catechism, there is kind of recorded in the catechism. They flow all from the gospel, right? So we see this even in the New Testament when Jesus and the women they were providing for the needs of the church, right? This is something that not only the women are supposed to do, but all people are supposed to do: provide for their needs, right? For the mission. That's prevalent in the Acts of the Apostles. It's prevalent through the ministry of Christ. And so it's almost, we talked about earlier, there's nowhere written in any law or encyclical or any even canon law that dictates that a priest is supposed to celebrate Mass every day. And in many ways, it'd be a diminishment if it had to be, right? Because a priest who is ordained, they should know, like, well, that's what I've been ordained to do, right? Now, in the same way, it's kind of sad these things have to be written down because they really shouldn't have to be, but okay, right? Sometimes people need that external aspect in order to actually do it. The church understands human nature, right? So yes, they are spelled out in the catechism, and I can give you the references in the paragraphs.
I just haven't heard tenets.
Yeah. There's
I'm
different
just
terminologies
wondering if
used.
there
I
is a
think,
different
there are
terminology.
different terminology you could use. I mean, some practice of the faith can be also known as that way, but
When
yeah.
you do an examination of conscience, I've never seen that.
well,
either.
there's always different examinations too.
I've
so
never seen.
there's tons of them out there. So yeah, I've seen them where they have those in there too. And I've seen them even for like grade school kids. So I mean, yeah. Yeah, question?
No, I remember the tenets, but when I was I didn't read. I was listening to the catechism. It's the Baltimore one with question answer.
Mhm.
But there was a lot of things like right in a row you can get lost on. Virtues and vices and tenets. And it's like, if I could listen to that thing 4 more times.
Yeah.
I would, it just every time it more sinks in.
Yeah, and they're all in the current catechism too. So, but yeah, I'll put the references in the description after the recording.
Cool.
All right. Any more questions about needs of the church? Great. The second one, or the third one, I guess, would be that kind of flows from that is really kind of directed towards really Lenten practices, right? So we really focus more on the season of Lent as a season of sacrifice because that's when Jesus sacrificed himself. So one of the third 10, I guess I would bring up is the fasting on fast days. Now, when we look at that, there's really there's kind of some kind of exceptions made, right, in that regard. And there definitely are limitations on that. So, for instance, there's only 2 days out of the year that faithful Catholics are called to fast. Do we know what those days are?
Ash Wednesday.
Ash Wednesday,
Good Friday.
Good Friday. Now, the thing that kind of fluctuates is the circumstances, right? So, for instance, there's age limitations. When I was growing up, it was 13 to 59. Nowadays, it's 18 to 59. The local bishop, is the one to determine that, and that's up to him. The idea there being that, well, the youth should probably get the protein because they probably need it for health reasons, and the elderly probably are in a state where fasting probably wouldn't be good for their health either. Whether 59 is elderly or not, that's up for my debate. I don't make that call. That's up to the bishop. That's what they determine. Fine, whatever. And of course, there are medical exemptions, right? So we always want to be cognizant of people's circumstances. But when you think about it, also like what that means is change over time. And that's been developed by the bishops themselves, the magisterium. So it used to be bread and water. That's it. Done. One time a day. Perfect. Some you went to extremes just water. Some went to extremes of nothing. And not only on those days, but also there'd be days throughout the week that you would fast. Right? Traditionally, I think they were like Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Friday and Saturday. So only like 2 days out of the week are actually kind of hamming it up, like Wednesday and Sunday. I don't know what Wednesday, but Sunday was always the day.
I think Wednesday is St. Joseph's fast day.
Maybe it was Monday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. That would be right. Either way, that's kind of how it works. So again, it fluctuated from place to place as well, because some had Saturday, some didn't. And especially if we were in a convent or a monastery, they might do it like 5 days out of the week, Monday through Friday, and then have a great day on Saturday. Now, the other thing though to consider is it was never appropriate to fast on feast days. So there are a lot of feast days, right? And so those took kind of precedent as well, even on a Friday. So if a feast day fell on a Friday, sorry, go downtown. Yeah, you got to feast. Yeah, we got to feast.
Feast day, not a solemnity, but a feast day.
Feast. Well, see, back then there were no such thing as solemnities, feasts, and feast days. It was it was a feast day.
Period.
Right. Yeah. Right. So basically, wasn't really distinction in that regard. So the feast of the birth of Mary would be the same as Christmas. Celebration. We're celebrating. There's something to celebrate here. That's what we're doing. Typically, particular saint days, especially like local saints, they would be feast days, which we see that today in the liturgy, right? So here in St. Louis, the Solemnity of St. Louis is elevated because, well, he's St. Louis, and we're named after him. So
and if you wanted to do it, you could call and see if we could have a St. Anne here, right?
Actually, by law, St. Anne automatically is updated because of the parish. Yeah, that's just regardless. The only thing I would have to give permission for is if I were to change the readings on Sunday. So if we were to like, let's say, push the celebration back to a Sunday, if we were going to use the readings for St. Anne, I have to get permission from the bishop for that. But we still use the same prayers, all that kind of stuff. Just Sundays are important. So yeah, that's a big important thing. But when you think about it, today, in most places, the only obligation is one large meal, and this like also this also fluctuates too, whether and or two small meals do not add up to one large meal.
I do that every day.
well, here's the question: what does that mean? Well, if I go to the buffet every day, and I get 3 plates of food at a buffet every day, now you can talk about how that violates the 5th commandment of, okay, fine, maybe so, right? But that being aside, let's say I'm an Olympic swimmer and I burn through 30,000 calories a day and I eat 20,000 calories a day from the buffet. Well, what does that look like for me? Well, okay, maybe instead of 3 plates, I'm having 1. Is that fasting? Yeah.
For you, it is.
For me, it may be. For someone else, that might not be fasting, right? So again, there is sort of a subjectiveness to that.
Well, let me ask.
Yeah.
The purpose behind this is to not just let Lent slip by and go, hey, it's Lent. I mean, really, to do something, right?
Well, again, remember, John, we're talking about the minimum.
Right.
We're talking about the bare minimum. And so, yeah, it's really more a recognition of that season as a season of sacrifice.
Change something.
And preparing something in Lent and sort of conform our sacrifice at the cross, which is also why a lot of people tend to do something during Lent, either in addition to their usual routine or take something away that they usually enjoy.
Mhm.
But again, notice that's not a tenet of the church. It's
Oh,
not
yeah,
more.
it
It's
is.
not. It's not morally binding to do that. That is complete discernment of yours about what you may be best for you.
Give up bubble gum. Or
Right.
something.
It's like, I tell the kids, like, Father Man's not going to burst through your door if you have a piece of piece of chocolate cake on a Thursday night of Lent. I have better things to do first off, and I don't know what you gave up. That's not something that I can really objectively say. Hey, didn't you? Whatever. That's between you and God.
Mhm.
And when it comes to the matter of for the sacrament, I can't tell you whether that's a sin or not. Only you can tell yourself if that's a sin or not. If it is a sin,
Well, I was going to say it's not really a sin.
Right.
It's a failure.
yeah, and that, and
It's
see,
a
I think that's and that's
failure.
and
It's a
that's the thing
failure.
about it, right? Because some people do. I think the more scrupulous people look at that and say, "Oh, I violated a vow." Well, it may be, but a vow is a very particular thing that's just between you and God. And so, what I always fall back on, in order to actually see how binding something is, you have to look at who the lawgiver is, right? So, in other words, what's obligatory? Well, if I'm the lawgiver, I also have the authority to change the law.
Yeah.
And so, if I want to say during Lent, well, I gave chocolate cake all through Lent. Well, except for Sundays, and except for Thursdays.
Well,
Yeah,
that
you
used to be
can.
the thing. Sundays didn't
Right,
count as
you-
a
you
day
had
of
your day
work.
off.
Well, see, but again, so that's the thing, right? The Sunday thing is sort of. I mean, because you're right. For the longest time, I was just like, well, wait, Sundays don't count. But it's like, but the point is, like, that's up to you.
Yeah.
That's up to you. I mean, whether you want
They-
Sundays
they
to count or
count when I
not,
made the
yeah, it does something. I mean, but either
Or the
way,
days
it's
of
still
Lent
your
don't
call.
include Sundays.
Yeah, right. I mean, that's the thing, because Sundays are always the Lord's Day. They're always
Yeah.
celebration of Easter,
Mhm.
and we can't fast on
Fast.
feast days, right? So, hey, that's kind of general understanding. But you still have the right to say, even on Sundays, that's up to you. I don't, whatever.
Right.
You're not going to hell if you had a piece of chocolate cake you gave up for Lent on Sunday or even a Thursday. If you decide Thursdays are fine, that's completely up to you. That is not a tenet of the faith.
So like giving up, so not eating meat on Wednesday or Friday is I'm sorry.
Well, we haven't gotten there
on-
yet.
I'm,
Well,
I'm
yeah.
sorry, on Ash Wednesday.
Well, we were talking about fasting.
No, I mean,
We're
like,
not there
you
yet.
just-
We're not there
no,
yet.
I'm just saying if you know that is something to do, and if you accidentally eat meat,
Well, let's get okay. We'll get to that in a second, because right
Okay.
now we're still talking about the fasting. So maybe to that point,
okay.
let's say you forgot it was Ash Wednesday.
Oh, I know this.
You wake up on a Wednesday morning. Maybe, I don't know, you go into work. They're having, I don't know, a breakfast
Donuts.
buffet, donut buffet or something at where. Okay. Hey, awesome. Blah, 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 blah. I have 3 of them. Okay. Hey, let's go to mass with their ashes. Oh,
You
Oh,
have just
no.
seen- yeah, you're going
You
straight.
forgot.
right.
It
Yeah.
wasn't it's
Right.
not a sin. It's not a sin.
So with all these, here's the thing, like even going back to the whole thing about providing for the needs of the church, in order actually for it to be a sin for you, have to know it is,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
So the same way, I have to actually realize it's still Good Friday or Ash Wednesday, and still do it.
And purposely do it. on
Purposely do it,
purpose.
right?
Now, if you come out of mass and you go back and have a donut, that's a sin.
Well,
If you
maybe
remember.
is that the only thing you're eating that day?
Well, I don't know.
See,
There wouldn't be anything.
see,
I would
that's what I'm
eat.
saying, though, right? I mean,
I
it comes
wouldn't
down
even
to
have had the donuts.
what is fasting really mean on that day? That depends, right?
I only had one meal.
I only had one meal. It was a
Huge
donut,
bowl of ice cream.
right? Yeah, maybe. I don't see. I don't know. There
So
is
that would be my point of the meat, though. If
The meat
you-
is- yeah,
the
so same thing with
you
meat.
Forgot,
Yes,
it's
right,
okay.
right.
But then if you have meat for lunch,
yes.
that's a sin.
In other words, if you know
remember.
better and you still do it, then yeah,
Yeah.
that
Then
is
you
a
remember.
that is a
Yeah.
matter for the confessional,
Yes.
right? So in the same way, the fasting. If I knew it was Ash Wednesday or Good Friday, and I went to the Chinese buffet and I had 6 plates of egg foo young and fried rice. Like I said, unless you're some kind of like super athlete that you're just eating 12 of those a day or something, well, yeah, you might want to take that to the confessional, right? But again, these people, I think, look at it, a lot of people just look at this as a man-made thing. Well, again, there's a practical and there's a theological. The theological aspect of this, we're trying to sacrifice. We're trying to do something not just for ourselves, but for others and even for God. Which is why I always give especially during Lent, give kind of this guidance saying, don't fast for yourself, fast for somebody else. It's better to have a goal that's outside of yourself because it actually helps you to do it better.
Yeah.
Right. So in the same way, I think when we fast on those days, it's best to fast for something or somebody in particular for their benefit and their good. Okay, that kind of goes then into the fourth tenet, right? Which again is associated with Lent, and that is no meat on Fridays in Lent. Now, you could extend this to say no meat on Fridays, period.
Which was
That's what it
Yeah,
is.
used to
That's
be,
just
yeah.
what it is.
What
No,
it
no,
is.
it's not even what it used to be.
It's supposed
Oh,
be
really?
what it
What
is,
actually
yes.
is, what people don't realize is that,
Currently.
so the document that kind of defines a lot of these things, it's in Sacrosanctum Concilium, right? So this is the document that kind of was looking at the liturgical norms and liturgical reforms of Vatican II. But it also goes into these pious practices, which is also where you kind of find some of these things. And it never actually abolishes the requirement to not eat meat on any Friday. What it dictates is that if you were to do some other form of penance on a Friday outside of Lent, it's very adamant about that. Lent, we still have to keep that, maintain that. No matter what, you still don't eat meat on Fridays of Lent. Outside of Lent, if you do some other form of penance on Friday, you could have meat because the sacrifice has been done.
Let's say every day I get up and I say my rosary.
Mm-hmm.
And on Fridays, I just say it and I eat, like, I don't remember that I'm.
Yeah, well, again,
I mean,
so we have to understand,
I have
right?
to say it on purpose for
Right.
that. Like,
But again, we have to understand,
it's not an indulgence.
has to have knowledge of it, right? So in other words, okay, what is outside my general routine on Friday that I could actually offer up as a sacrifice? Right?
It
Yeah.
can't
That
be
doesn't
a
have-
rosary if you do it every
That
day.
doesn't
Yeah,
have
it's
to be
not outside the
something,
road.
that doesn't have to be something grandiose. Maybe in addition to the rosary, you say a couple extra Hail Marys.
Right. That would do it.
That'll do it. Right? So in other words, they don't have to be anything like really severe. It could be as something as simple as, I didn't flick that guy off when he cut me off in traffic on Fridays.
For me, that would be huge.
Right?
Yeah.
Would that be offended? Sure, it would be. Is there a morality of that? Well, sure, but also I'm trying to get better. I'm trying to sacrifice. I'm being conscious of that, and that's the point. Same thing with fasting. The point of that is we find that in Scripture, right? We're called to fast in certain times. We're called to give these things up, to offer these things up to God.
But it doesn't have to be food. It could be TV.
Could be
or
anything, right,
music,
right.
or-
But there's a spiritual benefit in that actually is merited towards us. But also, practically speaking, it is good to actually practice self-control. That's a good thing to do, just from a practical standpoint. A lot of people may ask, like, what the whole meat thing on Friday, what's that come from? Well, part of that is understanding there's kind of three aspects of that. The disciples were fishermen primarily, so it's kind of recognition of that, the fisher of men, that, we're kind of, gathering that in. Fish has always been known throughout history as a common meal. It's actually something that everybody can eat. So in other words, I might not own a cow or a sheep. Well, okay, but again, see, there's
Most
been,
people live near
yeah,
water.
right, yeah. They don't have to be shellfish. What I'm saying is, like, there always has been this understanding that no matter what, I can grab a pole, get a fish out of the river, and eat that with my family that night. I don't have to be incredibly wealthy. I can be incredibly poor and still be able to do that. In other words, the church looks at this as not as something that's like, a huge sacrifice, but it's something that actually levels out everybody. It's actually an act of equality. It's actually showing that, okay, we can all have this. We can all engage in this communal meal, which is also a symbol of the Eucharist, the communion. Many people coming in to partake of the one bread and the one chalice, the one meal that we all can partake in. That's the idea behind it. That's the symbolism behind it. Now, there was also sort of more of a cynical aspect that said that, well, back in the Middle Ages, the Vatican owned a lot of ports, and they were making money off the fish trade. Sure, maybe.
why we're so wealthy now.
Exactly
That's a
right,
lot
right.
of you, that's worth a
Yeah.
ton of money.
But again, I mean, but
Yeah.
it also shows but also that there's a cynicism in the fact that, well, yeah, do you think that wasn't put to the use of the church and their ministry of like feeding the poor, of building these great monuments to God or anything like that? So everything the church gets is used, right? It was interesting going back to the whole tenets of the faith, pride needs of the church. There was a study done that said if the church were to sell off all of her possessions and like sell off all the churches and all the artwork and all that kind of stuff, they may be able to feed all the poor in the world for a month, and then that would be it.
Well, we do that now.
Well, but see, the point being though is then you're out those monuments and those places of worship and those art. So
And then you don't
Works
have
of art.
any-
you don't have any place to worship. You don't have any place to actually give this grace, these thanks back to God. So we're back in the Jews after the temple was destroyed, right?
Mhm.
Our own siege, but
Many of those artifacts were done prayerfully. They were creating.
oh sure. Well, that's what I'm saying. Like
So-
there's always a practical and theological. I mean, you can look at that from an objective standpoint and say, like, look at these grandiose things that were built, and why don't you sell off that Michelangelo and they'll make millions of dollars and feed the poor? Well, yeah. So here,
always be
but
rich
see, that's the thing.
Yeah.
The thing is, I could do that, sure, but then I'm feeding them maybe for like let's say all the people that goes $1 million doesn't go very that long for that far for that long, and so maybe I can feed all the people of Rome for a week with that $1 million. Then I'm out that Michelangelo, and I'd still have the poor. I still have to
Yeah.
feed them the next week. So what do you do? It's actually kind of a silly argument, I think, personally, but that's just how it goes. But that's kind of the reason behind the fish on Friday is that we understand this actually, there is a symbolic action involved with that. That's a spiritual aspect and also a practical one. Some people make the argument, well, I really like fish. Well, I mean, can I just go get a lobster on a Friday and let and be like, well, yeah, you could, and you could uphold the letter of the law, but the point of
It
the
defeats
law,
the purpose.
the purpose of the law is actually sacrifice, right?
Then you should go to McDonald's.
Well, filet o fish,
Filet-o-fish,
yes,
yeah.
filet o fish.
Trust me, that's
Yeah.
a sacrifice.
That would be a
That is
sacrifice.
always
Well, so
a-
and then-
Going
but
to
see-
McDonald's, period,
But see,
is
that's
a
the
sentence.
argument because I think some people, and,
Then you're
and
destroying
well,
your temple, aren't you?
but I think and here's the problem, because I think some people, even priests, have said this before too. Is like, well, then I might just have a hamburger. Well, no, you're still violating that tenet,
Right.
and that's still a morally binding thing that we matter for the sacrament, right? So, fish is still the thing. No meat on those days is still a thing, right? Even if you love fish, fine, have a cheese pizza, get a cheese quesadilla, whatever it is.
Unfortunately, when the rule changed, it wasn't really presented to the people.
It wasn't. You're right. You're absolutely right, Kathy. I mean, because that whole thing, you're talking about the ones on all Fridays, right?
Yes,
You're right.
yes. It
You're absolutely
wasn't
right.
Presented that way at all.
They're right.
Mhm.
And it's unfortunate because I mean, I wasn't around for Vatican II, but I did see the effects of it. And for the longest time, it was the same way. Like, it wasn't until I got to the seminary till I actually read the
So you
document.
read the document.
And I was like,
That's
wait a
right.
minute.
Yeah.
I was like, wait
That's
a
news
minute.
to me.
I know. I was actually kind of upset about it. I was like, and I went to my spiritual director. I'm like, he's like, well, you didn't know. I'm like, yeah, but why didn't I know? I was like, yeah,
Mhm.
Right.
we failed. All right.
And we still don't know.
Right.
A lot of
No, a
people
lot
still
of
don't.
people
but
still don't know.
You go tell people until you get ordained. Go do that. That's what I'm doing.
Yeah.
Everybody. That's what I'm doing. Okay. Was that the fifth?
Four?
Was the fourth? We got the fifth now. No, man, we're getting kind of hazy on this. Yes. A Catholic in good standing must receive the sacrament of reconciliation once a year.
Absolutely.
Now, that's another one I think that people get very hazy on. Because how often should we go to the sacrament of reconciliation?
As
Whenever
much
we
as
sin.
needed,
Whenever we
probably
commit
more than
mortal
once a
sin.
year, you know?
Whenever we commit mortal sin. Now,
More than once a year.
here's the thing. The reason we should go whenever we commit mortal sin, because we don't know when our time on this earth is coming to an end. And we do not want to be in that state when our judgment time comes up. Right? Mortal sin, again, is something objectively wrong, including a violation of the tenets of the faith. Right? That I know it's wrong and I do it anyway. Once I do that, I am now in a state of mortal sin. I need the sacrament of reconciliation, bring me back. Or in extreme
How is that
cases,
moral and
anointing.
not venial?
Because it's moral because I know better and I do it anyway.
where's your brother? It's not murder, but it's still you did something you
Right.
know you shouldn't have done, and you're really.
So in other
you know
words,
what? You
so
wouldn't have done it in front of God.
let's take now the whole situation with the meat on Friday, right? Knowing what I know now, after reading the document and understanding what the church fathers' intention was, if I were to have a cheeseburger on this Friday, without doing some form of penance,
yeah.
I am committing a mortal sin. Because now I know better. And I'm saying, I don't care. I'm directing on myself. I'm going to do this anyway. That's a mortal sin. Now that's for me because I know better.
Okay.
For those who don't know better, and sorry, now you guys know better.
Right.
That is a mortal sin. That's an action against your own conscience. So that would be matter for the sacrament. Now, the reason that we go to the sacrament of reconciliation,
We get grace.
we get grace, that's true. I mean, there's reason, but I mean, the main reason we do that is so that we can actually fulfill the final tenet of the faith, which is to receive the Eucharist once a year. Preferably, if you're going to receive the Eucharist once a year, during the season of Easter. That's what the church asks, right? So we go to the sacrament of reconciliation to make sure our conscience is clear and our souls are clean to receive God into ourselves. Now, you could say, well, what if I don't have any mortal sin on my soul? Okay, go anyway.
Right.
Go anyway.
What could it hurt?
That's what the church asks you to do. And it's not for your detriment, it's for your benefit.
And there was a time you could only go once in a lifetime.
Right. Well, there were times where people only went once in a lifetime. And because the reason behind that was people thought that, well, I want to make sure that I go to heaven. And so I'm going to wait until my time comes up to confess to ensure that I'm going straight into heaven. Because the other part of that would be sometimes the penances are rather severe. And especially for those who are maybe like feudal lords that got into a lot of fights with their neighbors, or maybe weren't as temperate in their appetites. Well, their penances might be rather severe, which would include maybe a pilgrimage, or maybe giving some kind of hefty, donation to the church.
Okay.
And so, well, boy, I want to make sure that I got the time to do that.
Going to the IRS.
Right, yeah, right,
Yeah.
yeah. So in other words, there was a practicality behind that. The church never actually said that you can only go once a year, once your lifetime. But the thought there was that, well, boy, especially these Irish monks, boy, they're getting out some penances that are pretty severe. I mean, I got to go to the Holy Land now. Well, it's going to take at least 5 years, and God, I hope I survive. And it used to be the fact that you have to go to the penance before you get the absolution. So the sacrament of confession developed over time.
But you can't give a penance that's going to be a burden on somebody.
Well, but here's the thing, right? At that time, the penance also should just be justified in the fact that it should match the crime.
Yeah.
So if I'm a feudal lord, and this is also where binding indulgence came into practice.
Mhm.
If I'm a feudal lord and I have, let's say 1,000 serfs, and let's say every year of my life I've tried to claim the land of my neighbor and actually fought over it and took life because of that. And maybe some of my serf women I kind of took advantage of a few times, and maybe I have some illegitimate children out there running around from these women. And maybe, I wasn't so great with the things that I brought in from my harvest, and maybe I kind of kept a little more than I should, and maybe didn't give a good wage for it. That's a lot. And now I have to go to this confessor and tell him every single time I've done it, what the circumstances were, or what the occasion was, which could take a long time. And more than likely, the penance I'm going to get, especially because I can afford it, is probably go to a pilgrimage in Rome, which could take years. Or even worse, maybe the Holy Land, which could take more years. And maybe I might not even survive and might not get back to the absolution. Would it be better if I wait to my deathbed where I can't do all these things and they have to be merciful on me?
How do you know when your deathbed?
That's the point.
And if you got a freeze right
That's the
there,
point, right?
Mhm.
That's the idea. That's why there was a development over
Gamble.
time. It is a gamble. And that's what the whole idea of the sacrament of reconciliation was not directed towards. It's meant to be like, no, it needs to be free you, but you also have to give a penance that kind of matches what you're doing. And at the time, they weren't given the absolution until the penance was done. This is during the time also where they had the order of penitence. So especially if you were a big three, meaning if I violated the fifth, the sixth, or the seventh commandment mortally, well, I'm actually barred from celebration of Mass, and I have to stay outside of Mass, at least, and not go to the Eucharist for months until Easter Vigil. And my job is to beg for alms for the church outside the church until that happened. So the development of, maybe that'd be next Friends from Faith. We talk about the development of the Sacrament of Confession. That's kind of an interesting topic. Maybe look at that in October. Remind me of that. So yeah, but that was the whole idea. I go to confession in order to receive the Eucharist, and usually it would be done during the time of Easter. But again, we go to the Sacrament of Reconciliation so that we're cleansed of mortal sin, so that when our time on this earth comes to an end, we can enter into heaven in friendship with our Lord. Right? But even better, I can actually receive Him in myself. So again, these things are not meant to limit us. And when you think about it, once a year, that's it. Now, some people get that conflated. They may say, well, okay, then why do we go to Mass every Sunday? Because the third commandment is a thing. The third commandment obligates you to go to the Mass every holy day of obligation. Sundays and other holy days of obligation. And if you were to do that, if you were to miss that willfully, you are committing a mortal sin. So, even though you go to Mass doesn't mean you should receive the sacrament of the Eucharist. Going to Mass is the obligation.
right?
Receiving the Eucharist is not the obligation, except for once a
Yeah.
year. Yes. But it is an obligation once a year. So, those are the tenets of the church that are morally binding for all Catholics. And they would be, if they were to be violated willfully, they're a matter for the sacrament of reconciliation. Unpopular opinions, but still truthful. Questions, comments, concerns, heresies.
Like nothing that you told me felt like it was against what we believe. You know what I mean? It
Well-
just is all it all fits into what we should be thinking.
Well, the point of this, John,
is
is part of this is giving reasons. It's important to understand why. Because like it's easy to say, well, this is what the church teaches, but that's a man-made thing, so I don't care. Well, all right, but here's the reason why the church teaches it. Here's the reason why the church gives it, because it's meant for your betterment. It's also meant for the betterment of the people around you. And not only that, but it also has a morally binding aspect where it has effects in the life to come.
Yeah.
I talk about the job of a priest is sometimes to burden people, oftentimes to burden people. This is part of the burden. Because I think people just don't know that. Honestly, I didn't know it. I mean, when I read the thing about the meat on Friday, I was like, what? I was genuinely upset. And even the thing about providing for the needs of the church, I kind of knew that growing up, but it was like, yeah, whatever I do things, it wasn't until I was in my 30s I really kind of took that to heart and actually started doing things. I mean, I think I was a minimalist Catholic for a good portion of my life. Just, I'll go to Mass on Sunday and maybe holy days of obligation, if I can. Because, I got work.
right.
I got stuff.
Life.
Life happens.
You're making up for it now.
Well, I hope so. Barely. But yeah. But I mean, that's the thing. It's like I didn't see these things in the good they were because I didn't understand them.
So maybe a question comes up as to why aren't homilies directed towards some of these?
Yeah, I think the sometimes, okay, are saying homilies or sermons? Because there's a difference.
There is.
Yes, okay. Homilies, it kind of depends on the reading. I mean, I don't know how you really, it'd be kind of awkward if Jesus is like kind of showing, woe you Pharisees who talk about the wash the outside of the cup and don't flu. Well, okay, is that an opportunity to bring it up? It may be, but it'd be kind of an awkward time to bring it up.
Well, then how do you educate your people?
Hopefully through this,
Well,
partially. But I think also too, sometimes that's through adult faith formation. It's through kind of these aspects of Bible study. Like, I mean, so in Bible study, what's very freeing about that is that you're not necessarily, I don't want to say pigeonhole. That's not a good word, but you're free to kind of pick the passages that actually apply in these cases. So in other words, when Jesus talks about do what the Pharisees say, but don't do what they do,
Mhm.
right? In other words, what he's saying is they do have a morally binding aspect in the fact that they are given proper authority, as is the church. The church was given authority to kind of bind people and loose people, which means she does have the right to put burdens on her people. And again, they're not meant to be burdens, they're meant to be freedoms, but people don't necessarily see it that way, right? So if I talk about, let's say, Matthew 16 and the authority given to Peter, that could be an opportunity, maybe.
If you read about Cain and Abel, that
That could be an opportunity, but also too, like,
There's
especially,
a lot of
well,
opportunities
but also
there.
too, especially on Sundays,
Yeah.
you're not really hearing the entire Bible on Sundays.
No.
If you went every day for 3 years, you hear the entire Bible. So maybe if you came to daily mass every
Didn't
day,
even hear
you
them.
might, not Obadiah, but you would hear those aspects, and maybe that could be brought up. But I think also sometimes, and this is a struggle for a lot of preachers, and I find this all the time, there's such depth in a lot of these readings. Which way do you want to go?
Yes.
Because sometimes a particular topic applies more directly to more people in your congregation than others.
It was just a question.
No,
that had been asked
I
to
think it's a
me
valid. I think it's a
before.
valid
Yeah.
question. I think it goes to show that there's so much out there that the church teaches. You're just hitting the iceberg regardless, right?
Mhm.
And I think we have to trust that when these things are brought up in homilies, whatever they may be, they're brought for a purpose of the Holy Spirit. And maybe they don't necessarily address everything, but nor are they really meant to, right? It's hard, but I think the Holy Spirit still works through them. So yeah, but that's a valid question. I just think it's because, well, does it apply all the time? You know, a lot of people have the same question about, like, well, why don't we preach more about, money? Well, some of the critiques that have actually driven people away in the past has been the fact that their pastors talk about money too much. Now in reality, the pastor probably has brought it up like 3 times a year.
Right.
I remember growing up, I think our pastor maybe talked about it maybe 3 times. One, like in September on stewardship. One maybe around summertime when, like, the usually that's when the collections go down because people are out of town. And maybe one time during, like, the Easter season and a time of generosity. But I actually knew people in my parish, people that were good holy Catholics that were saying, well, he talks too much about money.
What are they feeling guilty?
Well, right. I mean, that's the thing, though, right? So it's like,
You hit a nerve.
yeah, I don't know. But it's also one of these things where it's like, well, you're not going to please all the people all the time either.
Yeah.
So
At the end of the fiscal year is a time.
sure.
We previous pastor used to call it the sermon on the amount.
Yeah, and I mean, we typically, I know we're getting ready probably to publish our put out the finances coming up here at the end of September. So we usually will take a Sunday, we talk about Stewardship Sunday, which will probably be part of that. And usually the gospel's in relation to that. So yeah, you can bring it up then. But I mean, the thing is, if you get too focused on that, sometimes that becomes what you're basically being driven towards, right?
It
And
could be a little bit more in our bulletin.
well, we do post our income every week. But,
It's pretty vague.
well, again,
Is it
we
just what's collected at church? Is it what comes in
that's from the weekly collections.
on the online?
Yeah, everything we get, whether it be collection or
If you pick
online.
up the bulletin, you have no
Well,
idea. Yeah,
well,
no
again,
idea.
this is not the topic for this conversation, but
Sorry.
but yeah, I mean, could things be done? Sure, I don't know, but like when it comes to like putting it in the liturgy, sometimes it also feels icky too.
Yeah.
So yeah, it kind of depends. I think you try to find the best way you can communicate it. All right.
Cool.
Questions, comments, concerns, heresy.
Good.
All right. Well, thanks for coming, everybody. We'll see everyone next week, right? I think we're having next week. Yeah. I'm trying to think if there's anything coming up that would be problematic, but I think we're okay. So we'll see everyone next week for Bother the Father. So hope everyone has a good night, and thank you for joining us. We'll see you next week. Oh, that's a good one. Wow.